Hi everyone, my name is Valery and welcome to my presentation, Why We Do What We Do, What Developmental Psychology Taught Me About Change. Today I want to share something that completely changed the way that I look at human behavior. Before this class, I thought people simply made good choices or bad choices, but now I realize that many of our behaviors make perfect sense once we understand where they come from. And obviously those behaviors are what influence the choices that we make. During the semester, I completed two developmental psychology projects. One of them was focused on changing one of my own habits, which was impulse shopping, and the other was focused on helping someone that I love learn to accept help after spending a lifetime believing that she had to do everything herself. And even though these seem like very different situations, I discovered that they were connected by one important idea, and that is that our past shapes our present, but it doesn't have to determine our future. So, why does this all matter? One of the biggest lessons that I learned this semester is that behavior rarely appears out of nowhere. Most behaviors develop over years through our experiences, our relationships, and environments. Everyone has behaviors that they wish that they could change. Some people have overspending, anxiety, perfectionism, difficulty trusting others, avoiding emotions. And instead of asking, what's wrong with this person, developmental psychology teaches us to ask, what happened to this person that led them here? And that one question changes everything. It shifts our focus from judgment to understanding. It shifts our focus from blame to empathy. And by exploring the roots of our actions, we are able to gain insight into patterns that have been woven into the fabric of our lives. So, for my self development project, I decided to work on something that I have struggled with for years, which is impulse shopping. I have always loved shopping, window shopping and regular shopping, especially at stores like Target and Amazon. And I was the type of person that if I saw something on sale, I would fall for the trap and I would convince myself that I was actually saving money by buying it on sale. And the problem wasn't that I couldn't afford every purchase. It was that all of those tiny little small purchases were adding up and they were keeping me from reaching much bigger goals that I had, like saving for a new car, moving out on my own, building an emergency fund, and eventually buying a house. So at first, I thought that my problem was simply just a lack of self control. But through this project, I realized that my impulse shopping was much deeper than that. It had become a way of coping with stress, with boredom, and it was also a way of rewarding myself after a long day or a tough week. It was kind of, I used it as like a pick me up, except I used it very often. And that excitement of buying something new gave me temporary relief, but it never really lasted. So the problem was that I was buying things that I didn't actually need. I was just buying them because, again, that temporary joy that I felt. And as I reflected more, I realized that this behavior was also connected to my childhood. I grew up in a low income household where money was always tight. My parents worked incredibly hard, but there were many things that we just simply couldn't afford. I often watched other kids have things that I wanted, but I knew that we couldn't buy. And now that I'm an adult with a steady income, buying things I feel like became a way of telling myself, I finally can, like I've made it. And that realization completely changed the way that I viewed my behavior. So instead of seeing myself as someone with poor self control, I began to understand that my spending habits were connected to experiences that I had growing up. Developmental psychology taught me that many of our behaviors have deeper roots, and once we understand the why behind them, we're in a much better position to change them. So today, instead of asking myself, can I afford this? I find myself asking, will this purchase help me reach the future that I'm working toward? And that shift in mindset has probably been the most meaningful outcome of this entire project. So, two theories that completely changed how I approached my project were the information processing perspective and Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. So, the information processing perspective taught me that making better decisions isn't automatic. We have to, knowing what to do is different from actually doing it. So I had to slow down my thinking before making purchases. And then Vygotsky's socioculture theory helped me understand that my beliefs about money weren't created overnight. I didn't just wake up with these beliefs one day. They developed through my childhood experiences and my family environment. And once I recognized that those influences, it became easier to challenge them. I started implementing strategies that align with these new insights, and I began setting clear intentions before shopping. And I would ask myself if each purchase truly aligned with my goals. I also looked for support from my family, from my sister. I engaged in open conversations about money and spending habits. And by doing all these things, I was able to reframe my mindset and just build a healthier relationship with money overall. So, some of the strategies that I tried, that's what I'm going to go into. But before I get into that, instead of depending just on willpower, I realized that I needed to change my environment because that's where most of my impulse shopping started. So first, I deleted shopping apps from my phone like Amazon, Target, and Old Navy. Those were all like my top 3 stores that I would just doom scroll in. I deleted them from my phone so that I wouldn't mindlessly scroll through them whenever I was bored. I also started using the 24-hour rule. So if I wanted something that wasn't a necessity, I waited at least one day before buying it. So I would leave it in my cart for 24 hours. And most of the time, I realized that I didn't actually want it anymore after that 24-hour waiting period. Another thing I did every Sunday or every week, I tracked my spending. And then on Sundays, I would review where my money had gone that week. So this helped me become more aware of my spending patterns instead of just ignoring them and pretending that I didn't have a problem. I also told my sister about my goal and I asked her to check in with me regularly. So having someone else ask how I was doing gave me an extra layer of accountability. And then lastly, I removed my saved payment information, like my debit card information, from my phone, like my Apple Wallet. And I deleted like my saved, like, you know how when you buy something online, sometimes you can like save your card information. I deleted that too, because even though I had all these other strategies, I did catch myself every once in a while still slipping up, and I would cheat and use my Apple Wallet at stores and spend money that I didn't need to spend. So I had to leave my debit card at home and take money, physical money, out from the bank, and just to have that extra accountability. But none of these strategies completely eliminated or got rid of my impulse shopping overnight, but together they are helping me stop that habit that I developed over the years. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned is that behavior change isn't just about having more self-control. Sometimes it's about designing your environment to make better choices easier. So by making these small intentional changes, I became much more mindful of my spending and started making decisions that supported my long-term goals instead of just my immediate wants. And even though I'm still working on this habit, I now feel like I'm in control of my spending rather than letting my spending control me. And that shift in mindset has been the most meaningful outcome of this project. The biggest success wasn't actually spending less money, it was changing how I thought. Instead of asking if I could afford something, I started asking whether it was something that was going to help me build the future that I wanted. And that shift in mindset is something that I still use today and I want to keep using. It's about aligning my spending with my values and my long-term goals. And this approach transformed my relationship with money from one of anxiety to empowerment. I began to see each purchase as an investment in my future rather than just momentary pleasure. And this mindset shift was supported by the strategies that I implemented, like tracking my spending weekly and practicing accountability with my sister. These methods provided a structure that reinforced my new way of thinking, which made it easier to stay committed. For my second project, I wanted to understand someone I love, so I'm going to refer to them as the participant, but for confidentiality reasons. The participant is a 59-year-old woman who is the oldest of 6 siblings. She grew up in Mexico during a time when traditional gender roles played much of the household, or they placed much of the household responsibility on women. So as the oldest daughter, she was expected to care for her younger siblings, help manage the household, and take on responsibilities that were well beyond what most children her age were expected to handle. She also grew up in a home where there was a lot of family conflict. Her parents were always arguing. There were times where they would separate, then they would get back together. And so that all created a cycle of instability throughout her childhood. And during these difficult times, she experienced emotional and physical abuse, while also being expected to assume many of the responsibilities that were typically carried out by the adults in her home. And during those times where her parents were separated, her mom would leave their home for a set period of time. And during that time, the participant became the primary caregiver for her younger siblings and was responsible for cooking meals, cleaning the house, running errands, caring for both her siblings and her father. And she was repeatedly told that these responsibilities belonged to her whenever her mom wasn't present. So instead of being able to rely on the adults around her for comfort and for security, she learned from a really early age that she had to depend on herself to navigate difficult situations. And over many years, this self-reliance became a survival strategy, which led her to develop a strong sense of independence as a way to cope with those challenges that she experienced throughout her childhood. So, throughout my life, I noticed that the participant was always the person taking care of everyone else. She would go out of her way to help family members, friends, and anyone who needed support. However, when others offered to help her, she almost always declined, even when she was overwhelmed and could use the help. For many years, I assumed that this was just part of her personality, and I thought that she was just very independent and a little bit stubborn. But after studying a little bit of developmental psychology and learning more about her childhood experiences, I began to see her behavior differently. As a child, she learned that she could not consistently rely on the adults around her for support. So instead, she was expected to solve problems, care for others, and manage responsibilities on her own. So over time, self-reliance became more than a personality trait. It became a survival strategy. So because of this, accepting help as an adult can feel uncomfortable, and even when there is support that people are willing to give. So, learning about developmental psychology completely changed the way that I understood the participants' behavior. Erickson taught me that healthy adulthood isn't just about caring for others, it's also about allowing others to care for you. And then Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory reminded me that development is shaped by family relationships, culture, and life experiences. So the participant wasn't simply just choosing to be independent, her environment taught her that she had to rely on herself to survive. From a young age, she learned that asking for help wasn't an option because she was expected to take care of others, even during difficult circumstances. And over time, this belief became deeply ingrained and continued to influence how she approached relationships and everyday challenges as an adult. Understanding this perspective helped me realize that behaviors we often label as personality traits can actually be adaptations to early life experiences. So while independence is a valuable strength, emotional well being also involves trusting others, accepting support, and recognizing that vulnerability is not a weakness. So today, she's slowly redefining what strength means, and instead of believing that she has to carry every burden alone, she's learning that true resilience also includes allowing others to help and recognize. She's recognizing that giving and receiving support are both important parts of healthy development. So my understanding of Erickson's and Bronfenbrenner's theories guided the design of my developmental acts. Erickson's theory helped me recognize that healthy adult relationships involve both giving and receiving support, while the participants while the participant was always has always been willing to care for others, she rarely allows others to care for her. Bronfenbrenner's theory also emphasized that development is shaped through everyday interactions within the family. So instead of trying to change lifelong habits in one conversation, I focus on creating consistent opportunities for her to experience positive support. So for 3 weeks, I intentionally looked for opportunities to encourage the participant to accept help. Twice a week, I started conversations about how she was feeling, and I asked if there was one responsibility or a task that I could take off of her plate. And I also offered to help with everyday tasks such as cooking dinner, buying groceries, carrying groceries, and running errands. And at first, she refused, but I gently reminded her that accepting help doesn't make her weak and that our family wanted to support her because we care about her. I was careful not to pressure her since my goal was to create a positive experience rather than force change. And although the changes were slow, I noticed some progress. The participant became more willing to accept help with smaller tasks instead of automatically refusing every single time. She also became more open during our conversations and acknowledged that she often feels responsible for handling everything herself. Other family members also became more intentional about offering support, which helped create a more collaborative environment at home. So this might be the big. Oh, did I skip a slide? I did. Sorry. The changes were small, but they were meaningful. She started accepting help with little things. She opened up more about how overwhelmed she felt, and even other family members became intentional about helping. And I realized that meaningful change usually happens slow. The biggest lesson that I learned all semester was understanding developmental psychology made me less judgmental towards myself, towards other people, towards the participants. And instead of labeling behaviors as laziness or stubbornness or weakness, I learned to become curious because that curiosity is what creates empathy. So people aren't just difficult, they are shaped by their experiences. And if you're watching this because you're trying to change something in your own life, here's my advice. Don't just ask what you're doing, ask why you're doing it. Understand your story, be patient with yourself, create systems instead of relying on motivation, and remember that lasting change happens one small decision at a time. And I'll leave you with one final thought. Your past may explain your behavior, but it doesn't have to define your future. And this class taught me that developmental psychology isn't just something that we study, it's something that we live every day. It helped me understand myself. It helped me understand someone that I love. And it reminded me that real growth begins with awareness, compassion, and small intentional choices. And thank you so much for watching.